There is a particular kind of financial worry that works differently from most others. It is not the worry of overspending, or of making a bad investment, or of losing a job. Those worries have a cause that you can identify, and usually a path toward resolution. You made the mistake, you correct it. You lost the money, you figure out how to recover. The anxiety, as unpleasant as it is, points toward something actionable. This worry does not do that. This worry is quieter, more diffuse, and in some ways more unsettling, because there is almost nothing you can do about it. It is the worry of having done everything right, having worked, having paid your taxes, having contributed faithfully for 30 or 40 years, and then finding, in the years when those contributions were supposed to pay off, that the promise underneath them has quietly become uncertain. It is the worry about Social Security. For most people, the worry does not arrive all at once. It seeps in gradually. You are in your mid-50s, and you start receiving those annual statements, the ones that show what you have earned and what your projected monthly benefit would be if you claim at 62, at 67, or at 70. You file them away, or you read them carefully, or you do something in between. But you start to notice the numbers. You start to understand, in a slow and vague way, that those numbers are becoming part of the plan. And then the news arrives. A headline says the trust fund will run out by 2033. A politician says benefits will never be touched. A financial commentator warns you not to count on it. Another one says you are being irrational to worry. You are trying to plan your retirement, and the floor of that plan keeps feeling less solid than it should. This is not a small worry. Social Security is not a marginal government program tucked away at the edge of the federal budget. It is the financial foundation of retirement for an enormous portion of this country. Roughly 67 million Americans receive a Social Security check every month. For approximately half of Americans over 65, that check represents at least half of their total income. For many, it is considerably more than half. The program pays out more than $1 trillion every year, making it one of the largest social expenditures in the history of any democracy. And yet, despite its scale and its centrality to the lives of so many people, Social Security remains, for most of those people, one of the least understood programs in the federal government. People know they paid in. They know they are supposed to get something back. They have a number printed on a statement somewhere. But the mechanics, the trust funds, the payroll tax structure, the actuarial projections, the political negotiations, those have always felt technical. Handled by someone else, not something an ordinary person needed to understand in detail. What changed in recent years is that the someone else part started to feel unreliable. The political system that was supposed to manage the technical questions has become visibly paralyzed on this particular issue. The people responsible for protecting the program are using it as leverage in fights about other things. And the ordinary person who has been paying in for 4 decades, who wants to know whether the plan still holds, is left trying to extract the truth from a fog of noise and contradiction. That is what this video is here to do. We are not here to alarm you. We are also not here to offer the kind of empty reassurance. Everything will be fine, don't worry about it. That does nothing for your actual planning. What we are going to do is walk through, slowly and honestly, what is actually happening with Social Security. We will look at what the program was designed to do, and why that design is now under strain. We will look at the real numbers, the ones the trustees publish, not the ones that get amplified by whoever has an interest in frightening or comforting you on a given day. We will look at what this uncertainty actually costs people who are in the middle of planning their retirement years. We will look at what history tells us about how these kinds of crises tend to resolve. And we will look at what a person can honestly do, and honestly plan for, when the foundation feels less than certain. This is not a partisan video. We are not going to tell you which political party is responsible for the funding gap, or which policy proposal is the right answer. There are people on different sides of that debate who have thought carefully about it. What we are going to do is treat you like a thoughtful adult who has paid into a system for most of your working life and deserves a clear, honest account of where that system currently stands. Because you do. You have earned that much. Social Security was signed into law in August of 1935, in the depths of the Great Depression, by Franklin Roosevelt. To understand why it was created, you have to understand what old age looked like before it existed. There was no national pension system. There was no federal safety net for people who had worked their whole lives and outlived their savings, or their physical ability to continue working, or the willingness of family members to support them. Poverty among the elderly was not exceptional or uncommon. It was the expected fate of a large portion of the population. Many older Americans in the early 1930s were utterly destitute, with no recourse and no system to turn to. The program was designed to change that fact. A payroll tax, paid by workers and employers in equal shares, would fund monthly benefits for people who reached retirement age and had contributed to the system during their working years. It was not an investment account. Your contributions did not go into a personal fund with your name on it, growing quietly until you retired. The money collected from current workers would go directly to current retirees, with no individual accounts, no personal investment returns, and no stored savings sitting in a vault somewhere. It was a transfer between generations, mediated by the federal government, built on the assumption that there would always be enough working people to support the retired ones. The system worked, at first, through a demographic arithmetic that was almost effortlessly comfortable. When Social Security launched in the late 1930s, there were approximately 40 workers paying into the system for every single retiree collecting from it. The math required almost nothing of any one worker. A small payroll deduction from 40 people could easily cover one person's monthly benefit. The initial tax rate was a modest 2% of wages. The program was manageable, sustainable, and financially stable almost from the day it began. But the arithmetic changed, because the country changed. The first thing that changed was life expectancy. When Social Security was designed, the actuarial assumptions were built around a population that did not typically live very long past retirement age. In 1935, life expectancy at birth in the United States was around 61 years. The full retirement age was set at 65. The program was designed, not cynically, but practically, on the actuarial reality that many people would never collect benefits at all, and those who did would collect for only a few years. The program was sized for short retirements. By 2000, average life expectancy had risen to 77 years. Today, a 65-year-old American can expect to live, on average, another 19 to 21 years beyond that birthday. That is nearly 2 additional decades of monthly benefits, 2 decades that the designers of 1935 simply did not plan for, because the medicine, the nutrition, the public health infrastructure, and the reduced physical toll of modern work that made that longevity possible did not yet exist. The program that was designed for 5-year retirements is now routinely funding 20-year ones. The second thing that changed was the birth rate. The post-war baby boom, the enormous generation born between roughly 1946 and 1964, created a long period of relative demographic comfort. There were many workers and many children who would grow into workers. The worker-to-retiree ratio held reasonably well through the mid-20th century, and the system remained solvent. But when the birth rate declined sharply starting in the early 1970s, the future labor force shrank with it. Fewer children born in the 70s and 80s means fewer workers in the 2020s and 2030s. And those are exactly the decades when the baby boom generation is retiring. The result is a ratio that has been shrinking for a long time. By the early 2020s, the worker-to-retiree ratio had fallen to roughly 3 to 1. By 2035, projections suggest it will approach 2.5 to 1. The comfortable 40 to 1 ratio of 1940 belongs to a different era. The system is now supporting many more people, for much longer, with proportionally far fewer workers contributing to it. Congress recognized this structural problem decades before it became urgent. In 1983, facing what was very nearly an immediate crisis, the trust fund was within months of literal exhaustion, and some beneficiaries were at risk of not receiving their checks. Congress acted. A bipartisan commission, led by economist Alan Greenspan and assembled under President Reagan, developed a package of reforms. The retirement age was gradually raised from 65 to 67. Benefits above certain income levels became subject to income tax. And most significantly, the payroll tax was raised enough to collect a surplus, deliberately more than the system needed at the time, with the explicit intention of building a reserve for the future. That reserve is what is known as the Social Security Trust Fund. At its peak, in the early 2020s, the trust fund held roughly $2.5 trillion, invested in special issue United States Treasury bonds. This was not an accident. It was built on purpose, as a cushion, a bridge, designed to cover the gap between payroll tax revenues and benefit costs during the decades when a large retirement cohort would be drawing down the system. Those decades began in 2021. Starting around that year, Social Security began paying out more in benefits than it collects from payroll taxes. The shortfall is currently being covered by drawing on the trust fund, first on the interest the fund earns, and increasingly on the principal itself. The Social Security trustees, who publish annual reports on the program's finances, project that at current rates, the trust fund will be fully depleted sometime in the early 2030s. The most recent report places that date around 2033, though the precise year shifts slightly with changes in economic conditions. This is the number that generates the most alarming headlines. And it is also the number most consistently misunderstood. When the trust fund depletes, the program does not stop. The payroll tax continues to be collected from every working American. The revenue continues to flow in. What happens at the point of depletion is that the system can only pay what it currently brings in, no more. Based on the trustees' current projections, incoming payroll revenues at that point would cover approximately 79 to 83% of scheduled benefits. Not zero, not a collapse of the program, but an automatic reduction of somewhere between 17 and 21% for every person receiving a benefit at that moment, if Congress takes no action between now and then. That is the real situation. Not panic-inducing, but not comfortable either. It is a number worth understanding clearly, because the alternative, a vague and formless fear that Social Security will simply disappear, is both inaccurate and useless for planning purposes. The funding math is important. It needs to be understood. But it lives in spreadsheets and actuarial tables. What matters, for the person who is 59 years old and trying to decide when to retire, is what all of this actually feels like from the inside of a life. And what it feels like, for many people approaching retirement, is a kind of quiet paralysis that is difficult to explain to someone who is not experiencing it. Think of someone who has done the responsible things. They worked steadily for 40 years, sometimes in jobs they did not particularly enjoy but showed up for reliably. They contributed to whatever savings vehicle was available to them. A 401k when they had one, a savings account when they did not. They own a home, with a manageable remaining mortgage. They have been careful with money, not extravagant, not reckless. And they have Social Security, which every official communication has told them to expect. They are now building their retirement budget. They are trying to figure out when they can realistically stop working, or reduce their hours, or shift to something less demanding. And the Social Security piece, the part that was supposed to be the stable floor under everything else, has become a variable they cannot nail down. Not a number, a range, a conditional estimate, a maybe. This creates a specific and underappreciated difficulty, because one of the most financially significant decisions a person approaching retirement must make is when to claim their Social Security benefit. You can claim as early as age 62, at a permanently reduced rate. For someone whose full retirement age is 67, claiming at 62 means accepting roughly 30% less than the full monthly benefit for the rest of your life. That reduction does not go away. You can wait until your full retirement age, currently 67 for people born in 1960 or later, and receive the standard projected benefit. Or you can delay beyond that, up to age 70, earning an 8% increase for each year you wait. In a world where you can trust the projected numbers, this is a complex but solvable calculation. It depends on your health and life expectancy. It depends on whether you have a spouse, and how their benefits interact with yours. It depends on your other income sources, and whether you need the money now or can afford to wait. Financial planners have worked out the formulas. The math, while genuinely nuanced, is manageable. But in a world where the base number itself is uncertain, where you are not confident that the projected benefit will actually be paid in full, the calculation loses its footing. The uncertainty introduces a variable that the formulas cannot cleanly handle. Some people respond by claiming early. A reduced benefit that arrives today feels more reliable than a full benefit that might be cut before it arrives anyway. A bird in hand. The reasoning is understandable, but claiming at 62 means locking in a permanently reduced check, and over a 25-year retirement, the cumulative cost of that reduction can be significant. A decision made out of fear can end up being the more expensive one in the long run. Others respond by delaying indefinitely. They are unsure what to do, so they wait for clarity that may not come. This can make sense if other income sources are available, but it can also mean leaving money on the table while the uncertainty persists unchanged. Still others avoid the conversation entirely. It is too complicated, too uncertain, too loaded with implications they do not want to face. They plan to deal with it when the time comes, which is a way of saying they are not planning for it at all. None of these responses are irrational, given the circumstances. They are natural human reactions to genuine uncertainty. But they carry real costs. Beyond the claiming decision, the uncertainty spreads through every part of the retirement picture. People who built careful budgets, people who sacrificed things in the present to be responsible about the future, are now looking at those budgets and wondering whether the foundation will hold. What if the benefit is reduced? What if the reduction arrives 5 years into retirement, after major decisions have already been made based on the projected number? What gets cut to compensate? The travel that was part of the plan? The ability to help children or grandchildren who need it? The small financial cushion that was supposed to keep a medical emergency from becoming a financial catastrophe? These are not hypothetical questions for people sitting in policy seminars. They are the actual texture of daily life for millions of people in their late 50s and 60s. Quiet, persistent, and largely invisible to anyone who is not carrying them. There is also something more subtle happening, something beyond the spreadsheet dimension that rarely gets discussed. When a large institution that people have counted on for their entire adult lives becomes uncertain, or is perceived to be uncertain, which for the purposes of planning amounts to the same thing, it does not only affect their calculations. It affects their relationship to the future itself. People who no longer trust the floor of their retirement plan do not simply adjust their retirement date. They pull back in ways that compound and spread. Some begin saving more frantically than is either necessary or healthy, depriving themselves of present quality of life to hedge against a future threat that may not materialize in the worst form they imagine. Some become more guarded and less willing to make long-term commitments of any kind. Some develop a low-grade financial anxiety that becomes a permanent background condition of their later years, not paralyzing, not dramatic, but present and quietly depleting. None of this makes the news. None of it appears in any official measure of economic health or retirement security. But it is real, and it is widespread, and it is one of the quieter costs of the dysfunction around Social Security that never gets counted when people talk about the funding gap. To understand what is really at stake in the Social Security debate, beyond the actuarial tables and the political maneuvering, it helps to step back and ask a more fundamental question. What kind of thing is Social Security, actually? The most common misunderstanding is the belief that it functions like a personal savings account. That the payroll taxes taken from your wages over your career were set aside, held somewhere in trust, accumulating quietly until you reached retirement age and the government handed them back. This mental model feels intuitive. It is how we think about most financial instruments. You put something in, it grows, it comes back to you. When people learn that the trust fund might run dry, this is what they imagine: someone reaching into their personal account and spending the money. It feels like theft, but that is not how Social Security works, and it never was. Your contributions did not go into an account with your name on it. They went to the retirees who were collecting benefits at the time you were working. You, in turn, will be supported by the workers who are paying in while you are retired. The connection between what you paid and what you receive is real in one sense. Your benefit is calculated based on your earnings history. But the actual money moved on the moment it was collected. It was never yours in the way that a savings account is yours. Social Security is a social contract. It is an agreement made between generations and enforced by the state. The working generation supports the retired generation, on the implicit understanding that the next working generation will do the same for them when the time comes. It is built not on financial returns or compound interest, but on something more fundamental and more fragile: trust. The trust that the society will continue to honor its commitments to its members across time, even as the specific people who made those commitments pass away and new ones take their place. This reframing matters because it changes the nature of the problem. If Social Security were simply an investment vehicle with an insufficient return, the fix would be technical. Adjust the formula, change the rate, solve the arithmetic. But if it is a social contract, the question is not only whether the numbers can be made to balance. The question is whether the society is willing to make the choices necessary to honor the commitment it made. Those are different questions, and the second one is harder. Here is the important thing that often gets buried in the noise: the arithmetic is solvable. This is not a situation where the numbers have been exhaustively analyzed and there is genuinely no way to make them work. Economists, actuaries, and policy analysts across the ideological spectrum have studied the Social Security funding gap for decades, and they have identified, with considerable precision, the tools available to address it. You can raise the payroll tax rate, currently set at 12.4%, split between employer and employee. A modest increase would generate substantial additional revenue over the long term and significantly narrow the gap. You can raise or eliminate the earnings cap, the threshold above which wages are not subject to the Social Security payroll tax, currently set at roughly $176,000 per year. Income above that level is not taxed for Social Security purposes, which means the highest earners contribute a proportionally small fraction of their income. Removing the cap would raise significant revenue without touching the benefits of any existing recipient. You can adjust the benefit formula, reducing payments for higher earners at the margin while protecting those who depend on the program most heavily. You can modify the annual cost of living adjustment, using a slightly different inflation measure that tends to rise more slowly. You can raise the retirement age again, as was done in 1983, reflecting the reality that average life expectancy has continued to increase since then. Any combination of these adjustments, applied with reasonable timing, closes the funding gap. Not elegantly, not without cost to someone, but definitively and mathematically. The problem is not that the solution is unknown. Every serious analysis ends in the same neighborhood of options. The problem is that every known solution requires someone to pay more or receive less, and every politician who proposes this faces the immediate political cost of having done so. This is the dynamic that the phrase, "the third rail of American politics," was coined to describe. Touch it, and you are politically finished. The phrase has been used so long that it has become almost a cliché, but the underlying reality has not changed. Politicians who proposed concrete changes to Social Security, even changes that were actuarially necessary, even changes carefully designed to protect those most dependent on the program, have historically paid for it at the ballot box. And so nothing has changed. Congress has watched the trust fund depletion date move closer for more than a decade. There have been proposals and commissions and carefully drafted reports. There has been almost no legislative action. The reason is structural. The short-term political cost of addressing the funding gap, raising taxes, adjusting benefits, telling tens of millions of people that the comfortable assumptions built into their retirement plans need some revision, exceeds the short-term political cost of doing nothing. The consequences of inaction are real, but they are deferred. The consequences of action are immediate. In a political system structured around 2- and 4-year election cycles, the incentive is consistently toward deferral. History does offer something worth holding onto, however. The 1983 crisis remains the most instructive precedent. At that point, the program was not projecting a depletion in a decade. It was within months, quite literally, of being unable to cover all of its scheduled payments. The political moment was genuinely urgent in a way that longer-range projections rarely are. And yet Congress acted. The Greenspan Commission brought together members of both parties, and the resulting legislation was signed by a Republican president with support from a Democratic House. The changes were painful. The retirement age was raised. Benefits above certain income levels became taxable. Payroll taxes went up. There was no good outcome available, only a range of difficult ones. But the program was stabilized, and it remained solvent for the following 4 decades. The fundamental lesson of 1983 is not that politicians reliably act in the public interest, or that fiscal responsibility wins the day. The lesson is more specific than that. When the political cost of allowing Social Security to fail becomes clearly greater than the political cost of fixing it, when failure stops being abstract and becomes imminent, something tends to happen. The electorate that depends on Social Security is large, and it is organized, and it votes. The political toxicity of allowing the program to collapse is understood by both major parties. Whether today's political environment can produce the kind of bipartisan cooperation that 1983 required is genuinely uncertain. The conditions are different. The trust between the parties is lower. The polarization is deeper. The media environment is more fragmented and reactive. But the mathematical reality of the problem, and the mathematical reality of the electorate, continues to point in the same direction that Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan eventually reached in 1983. That fixing the program is less dangerous than breaking it. And underneath all of this political calculation is something worth sitting with for a moment. Social Security exists because society decided, at a specific point in its history, that some risks are too large, too universal, and too fundamental for individuals to bear entirely alone. The risk of outliving your savings. The risk of outliving your ability to work. The risk of simply being old in a world that has moved on and has no particular use for you anymore. These are not personal failures. They are the common risks of a human life, and a society that cannot maintain the system it created to address those risks, not because it lacks the resources, but because it lacks the political will, is a society that has quietly decided that its commitments to its older members are negotiable. That is worth naming, even when there is no immediate solution to offer alongside it. So, after all of that, what is the honest answer? What can a person who is in their late 50s or early 60s actually take from this and use? The honest answer starts here. Social Security will almost certainly still be there when you retire. The scenario where Congress watches the trust fund deplete and does nothing while the checks stop is the least likely outcome, even accounting for the dysfunctional political environment we currently have. The political consequences of allowing that to happen, for members of Congress facing an electorate that includes tens of millions of retirees and near retirees, are understood. That particular outcome is unlikely to be allowed to unfold without a fight, and the fight, in some form, will most probably produce some version of a solution before the worst case materializes. But the honest answer also includes a second part that you deserve to hear clearly, without softening. The benefit you receive may be somewhat smaller than what is currently projected in your annual statement. Not dramatically smaller, not zero, but the numbers on that statement are based on scheduled benefits under current law, and current law has a funding shortfall that has not been resolved. Planning for a modest reduction, something in the range of 10 to 15%, is not pessimism or paranoia. It is a prudent acknowledgement of where things actually stand. What this means in practical terms depends heavily on your specific situation. If Social Security represents a large portion of your expected retirement income, if it is the floor that everything else rests on, then the uncertainty matters more, and building a somewhat larger buffer in your other savings is wise. A 10% reduction in a benefit that covers most of your expenses creates real difficulty and real choices. You want to know in advance that you have room to absorb it. If Social Security is one of several income sources, if you have savings, a pension, a spouse's income, or other assets contributing to the picture, then a modest reduction, while unwelcome, is more manageable. It changes the math at the margin without unraveling the plan. The question of when to claim remains personal and important. The general principle, that waiting increases your monthly benefit, and that the increase can be significant over a long retirement, is still true and still worth considering carefully. For people in good health who expect to live well into their 70s and 80s, delayed claiming tends to come out ahead in the long run. But this calculation should be made based on your health, your financial situation, your spouse's circumstances, and your actual needs, not on political speculation about what Congress might do. That last point is worth emphasizing. One of the temptations in this environment is to try to time your Social Security decisions around the political question. To claim early because you are afraid the benefit will be cut. To delay because you believe Congress will act and the full benefit will be protected. This kind of reasoning feels logical, but it is not planning. It is guessing at variables that are genuinely unpredictable. You cannot know when Congress will act, what form any action will take, whether adjustments would apply to people already receiving benefits, or which political outcome will actually materialize. Treating political speculation as a financial input tends to compound uncertainty rather than reduce it. What you can do is model a range of outcomes honestly. What does your retirement look like if you receive the full projected benefit? What does it look like at 85%? What would need to change, and could you manage that change? For most people who have planned carefully, working through those numbers reveals something more useful than fear. It reveals the actual shape of the problem, and in most cases, the actual degree of resilience already built into the plan. There is also something worth saying about the emotional dimension of this that the numbers tend to obscure. The anxiety that many people carry about Social Security is not irrational. It is a reasonable response to a real uncertainty in a program that genuinely matters. But anxiety, unexamined, tends to distort the decisions it surrounds. It pushes toward choices made from fear rather than analysis. It makes the planning conversation feel too painful to have, which means the planning does not happen at all. And that is worse, more costly, more dangerous, than any reasonable scenario in the funding projections. The most useful thing you can do with this anxiety is give it a specific shape. To understand, as clearly as possible, what is actually uncertain and what is not. The program is not uncertain. The payroll tax is not uncertain. The basic structure of the benefit, tied to your earnings history, is not uncertain. What is uncertain is the exact level of that benefit, in the specific scenario where Congress fails to act before the trust fund depletes. That uncertainty is real. It is worth accounting for in your planning. But it is not the same thing as the program disappearing. You paid into this system for decades. That is a real and documented fact. The promise made to you in exchange for those contributions is real. It is under pressure, and it has not been honored as consistently as it should have been by the people responsible for maintaining it. But it has not been broken. And the people who hold the responsibility for keeping it are not entirely free of consequence if they allow it to break. Perhaps the most honest ending to this conversation is the simplest one. Social Security was created on the idea that some risks, the risk of outliving your money, the risk of outliving your health, the risk of arriving at the end of a working life and finding nothing waiting, are too large and too common for any one person to face entirely alone. That idea is still true. The commitment built around that idea is still standing, even if it is showing the strain of time and political negligence. The promise is under pressure. Its precise value, in dollars and cents, is still being argued over in a city that argues over everything. But knowing that, really knowing it, rather than being swallowed by an indifferentiated fear of it, is already something. Clarity about a difficult thing is better than comfortable vagueness. And a plan built on honest assumptions, even uncertain ones, is better than no plan at all. You have spent a lifetime working with what you knew. This is what you know now. It is enough to build on. # suggested thumbnail text. The promise runs out. What's really happening? The math nobody explains. Your benefits, honestly. It's still there. #. Suggested video description. For decades, millions of Americans paid into Social Security without fully understanding what they were paying for, or what they could realistically expect in return. Today, the funding math and the political noise have created a quiet but real anxiety for people in their late 50s and early 60s. This video is not about panic. It is about clarity. We look at what the system was designed to do, where the numbers actually stand, what trust fund depletion really means, and what a person planning for retirement can honestly count on. Calm, factual, without drama, the quiet briefing, thoughtful long-form essays about money, aging, and modern life. ## fact-check notes. Verify current Social Security Trust Fund depletion projection date, approximately 2033, from the most recent trustees report. Verify current worker-to-beneficiary ratio, approximately 2.7 workers per beneficiary as of recent reports. Verify projected benefit reduction at depletion. Approximately 79 to 83% of scheduled benefits under current projections. Verify current full retirement age for people born in 1960 or later, currently 67. Verify current Social Security payroll tax earnings cap. Approximately $176,100 in 2025, adjusted annually by SSA. Verify percentage of Americans over 65 for whom Social Security represents 50% or more of income, approximately 50%, per SSA data. Verify average additional life expectancy at age 65 today, approximately 19 to 21 years, per CDC, SSA actuarial tables. Verify life expectancy at birth in 1935, approximately 61 years. Verify details of the 1983 Greenspan Commission reforms. Verify peak trust fund balance, approximately $2.9 trillion, reached around 2020-2021. Verify total annual Social Security payout and current number of beneficiaries, approximately 67 to 68 million beneficiaries, over $1 trillion paid annually.